Right, so here in our next video we are going to continue building our joints right down to the toes here. But before we do that, it may look kind of correct, but I noticed from rotating that way, that is a bit off. So you can actually select this thing again, this joint at the top here, as tie joint, and then instead of using the Z values in joint orients, you can actually use the Y and push it a bit here, and let's see whether that, so it's a bit off that way, so let's just push it here a bit more, and that should give us a nice alignment with the mesh, and I think that is correct for our purpose. Right, now from here we can continue, and let's go back to right view and get skeleton create joints. Now here's a note, when you create this joint, you don't want to, if I would select the end joint here and then draw the joints, what happens is it will be a child of that last ankle joint that we deleted this chain from. So you don't want to do that. So we're going to undo that. What we want to do instead is we want to place it somewhere out here so that it's not a child of that. So place it here and then kind of drag it here while you still hold left mouse button and let go, and you'll see that joint 4 has been created. With that, we can continue drawing our joints like that and press Q or enter to commit it. Let's go back to perspective, and you see it will be placed here, and if it's not, you can just move it in X and place it here where the last ankle is. Right, our next job is to kind of orient it so that it fits our mesh here. Now we can do one of two things. We can do like what we did earlier and keep on doing this, and I know the value was about what, -50, like that, but you'll see that we're starting to have a problem again. It's basically the same problem that we had when we tried to see. Now it's pointing up, so it goes all sorts of ways that it's not really what we want. So I'm gonna undo that. So what we want to do instead is we'll think of a better way to do this. So I'm going to select this part of the chain, which is what I call the foot joint, and we will unparent that. To do that, you press Shift P unparents it from that last joint, which is joint 4. You'll see that joint 5 is now in here. If I undo that, joint 5 was somewhere in joint 4, so if I press Shift P, it will now be outside. It will not be a child of joint 4. Alright, so now let's go and select joint 4 again, and what we want to do now is we want to make sure that it's all zeroed out. So just follow along with me. Zero that out, zero that out. Okay, what happens is you see that the y-axis is pointing up, and that's what you want instead in joint 4. Alright, and we want the joint orient y to be -90. So I'll just put in a value here of -90 and press enter. So now it'll flip the other way. You'll see what happens next. Also, it's starting to look like this joint 4 is the same size as the last old ankle joint that we had here, that one. So what I can do is I can select joint 4, our new ankle joint, and I want to change the radius to something bigger. So I select the radius name and just make it a bit bigger there, so it's much easier to select. And then with that, I will actually select the foot joint and parent it to joint 4. And to do that, you press P and it'll get parented. Now if I select joint 4 and I go back to attribute editor, go to the joint settings here. Right, so now when we're here, we can actually orient this back. So to do that, I'll use the Y values in joint orient, and let's just move it in position. You'll see that this is a much more easier way. It will kind of follow that plane and it will not go, you know, all sorts of ways. So we'll just keep on moving this. Again, to do that, hold control and click and drag using the left mouse button. Keep on going until we get it to orient nicely in the middle here. Have it align nicely in the middle here. That is about correct. Sweet. And one last thing to do is to have this final joint, which I call the toe joint, to be zeroed out in the joint orients, just as a good practice, so it matches the parent. So that was the parent. This child, the end joint, actually matches the parent's orientation there. Alright. Also, we sometimes ask, like, why do we need this? Because we're not going to, you know, we're not going to rotate until it's going to happen. But if I were to delete this, you'll see that there's no visual representation of how, you know, if I select that and start to move it, you know, we don't really see how that bone is moving. And that is why we need that in, so that whenever we select that joint, we can see how it's moving later on when we skin the mesh to the bone. But we still need that end joint, just for, you know, good practice and as a visual. It gives us a visual feedback when we're rotating the bone. Right, so the next thing we're going to do here is we are going to select joint 4, and depending on how you place it, perhaps, you know, it was a bit off there, we want to kind of snap it to that old ankle. So I enable this box, this square in the middle, so that all 3 arrows is enabled, not just one. So I enable that one, and we can hold V to snap to point. Sorry, again, enable that, hold V, middle mouse button, and snap it to that old ankle. You'll see that, you know, my V is actually my snap to points. When I middle mouse button and move it a bit, it will jump right to the old ankle there. Right, and with that, we know we are selecting the new ankle, joint 4. We want to click joint 3 and parent the new ankle to the old ankle by pressing P. So now it's parented. If I were to select the root here, it will all select and move together. So we have a complete chain for the legs now. Now the next thing we need to do is we want to first select this guy at the top, and we want to group that. So I'll select the joint, and to group it, you press Ctrl G. So it will create a group. It says group 1 here, and let's just rename it now. You can go into outliner here, doesn't really matter. And I will rename it to skeleton 01. Press enter. Eventually this skeleton 01 will be placed inside this group later on. Alright, and it's a good idea perhaps to kind of select all this. I mean, okay, the reason for that group is that, you know, if you were to scale, now things will be scaled from the origin instead. Sorry, let's just undo that. Say you scale uniformly like that, it will scale from the origin. So that's a good thing if you're resizing your characters. Let's just undo that. And but we won't be selecting the skeleton and scaling it that way. It'll be the group on top of skeleton that will be scaled. So that's a good note to know. So we're gonna select all this, and it's a good idea to right mouse button and lock, as well as hide selected. We can always show it again by going to edit channel control and go and find your transits. Where is it? If you wanted it to come back here again, just go find it here in channel control and say you want all this, and you can move it back to there. It'll show back here, and perhaps the scale one as well. And you can always unlock it, right mouse button unlock if you wanted to. So I won't do that. I want to kind of lock and hide it, so I'll undo and leave it as it is. Now the next thing we need to do is, of course, this skeleton will be a child of this one, the group beaver. So I select the skeleton and control and select that group node and press P, and our skeleton group will be underneath cartoon beaver, group cartoon beaver. Now what we need to do is, of course, rename all these joints. So if I select this first joint here, we are going to use this naming convention. So we try to use bind to say that this joint will have a mesh skin to it later on. So we'll be using that joint when we're skinning, when we're attaching the mesh to the bones. So I'll say bind, and since this is the left part of the leg, it'll be L underscore L, and then underscore, and I will call this my thigh, and then give it a name like 01. Press enter. Why I want 01? So that it is a unique name. Say for instance, for whatever reason I accidentally press Ctrl D, and this is actually a duplicate when you say thigh 2. So automatically that's a duplicate, so we don't want something like that. So let me just delete that. So it's good to have that 01 at the end there, so that we know whenever we think that whether we need it or we need to rename it or delete it and so on. Right, so moving down along the chain, I have this one here, so it needs to be to follow the same naming convention. So I'll copy the one from the thigh, select this joint now, paste it in, and this one will be my shin. So I'll just change that to shin, so it'll be bind underscore L underscore shin 01. Press enter, and then there's a way to select the child if you don't want to, because it can be hard to select the old ankle. So I can press the down button on my keyboard, and that will go to joint 3, as you see here. Remember, joint 3 is not what we want to have skin to the mesh. So if I were to paste that in, instead of using bind, I'm going to call it BE, which stands for bone end. And let's just give this the name of ankle 01. Press enter. Alright, and then you can press down again. Sorry, select that guy. Press down. Now what we see next is joint 4. And let's just go here. Oopsie, I don't want to do that. Okay, so we are in joint 4 here. Alright, so joint 4, we know that will be used to skin it later on. I'm gonna select the name, paste that in. So bind is correct because we'll be using it, and this is the right one that we're gonna use, bind underscore L underscore ankle 1. Sweet. So let's just move on and select this guy, pull up, select that, paste that in, and this will be called foot. Bind underscore L foot 01. And then the final one, which is our toe, and we know that we're not going to use it, it's there just for visual purposes. I'll just paste it in, and I'll say this will be bone end, and bone end underscore, and I will call this toe 01. Press enter. Alright, so now we pretty much have set up our chain joints for the left leg. We'll continue in the next video and see how we can mirror this and do all the pelvis and so on. So see you in the next video.